No Africans allowed in this area. Do I need to speak in a more understandable language? French security officer Jean Mercier looked mockingly at Ibrahim Traoré, who was dressed in a simple t-shirt and jeans. This confrontation, taking place in front of the French Cultural Center in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, could have happened on any day. But today was different. Since you have no ID, you cannot enter the building for security reasons, the officer repeated. Traoré took his cell phone from his pocket and dialed a single number. Colonel Zongo, could you pick me up from the outer gate of the cultural center? The moment he hung up, the radios of the French officers guarding the center began buzzing frantically. 10 minutes later, when 6 armored vehicles and fully equipped soldiers stood in front of the building, the expression on Officer Mercier's face was priceless. "Mr. President," said Colonel Zongo, saluting, "has anyone been bothering you? If we try to overthrow Traoré, the entire continent will rise up." It was early in the morning. The streets of Ouagadougou were just waking up. Ibrahim Traoré, the young president of Burkina Faso, had made a different decision this morning. Instead of wearing his military uniform, he had left the palace wearing a simple blue t-shirt and jeans. With just a single bodyguard, he wanted to explore the city on foot, to mingle with the people. "Today I just want to be a citizen," he had told his security guard Ahmed. "I want to see how my people live, how they feel." The Africa-Europe Economic Summit in Geneva was being held in the largest hall of the historic United Nations building. Ahmed was surprised by this decision. "Mr. President, this could be very risky. Your safety." "That doesn't matter, Mr. Ambassador," said Traoré, with an innocent expression. Traoré had cut him off with a smile. "The biggest mistake of African leaders is living disconnected from their own people. I don't want to be such a leader. Not just one, but like many of his citizens." "What do you want?" There was a deep thought behind this decision. Traoré was working to free Burkina Faso from the influence of foreign powers. He especially wanted to break France's influence over the country. But he couldn't do this without understanding what his people faced in their daily lives. Walking through the old neighborhoods of Ouagadougou, he bought food from street vendors and chatted with people. No one recognized him. Or so it seemed. In reality, some elders had recognized him but chose to remain silent. They understood why he was walking around like this. "Bread prices have risen too much," said an old woman selling Traoré a basket of mangoes. "It's becoming difficult to feed our children. Tomorrow morning, all the documents will be published in The Guardian, The New York Times, Le Monde, and Al Jazeera." Traoré nodded. This was a problem he knew about, but now he was hearing it not as a president, but as a citizen. The difference was significant. Toward noon, while walking in the city center, a building caught his attention. The French Cultural Center. It was an impressive structure from the colonial period. He wondered what kind of activities were organized inside? What was being done to spread French culture in Burkina Faso? "Shall we go in?" he asked Ahmed. Ahmed looked concerned. "That's not a good idea, Mr. President. French intelligence might be active here." The negotiations continued until morning. "I'm curious," said Traoré. "Come on, let's just take a look. No one will recognize me. Now, please, will you promise not to publish the documents?" They approached the security checkpoint in front of the building. French security officer Jean Mercier had spotted them from a distance and immediately became alert. 2 African men looked suspicious to him. "Stop," said Mercier, raising his hand. "Where do you think you're going?" "You've succeeded, Mr. President," said Zongo with pride. Traoré replied calmly. "We want to go inside." "I heard there's an exhibition today," shouted French President Pierre Laurent, calling his advisors to an emergency meeting. Mercier laughed dismissively. "May I see your ID?" A process would also be initiated to review the activities of Western companies in other African countries. Traoré checked his pockets. He had actually forgotten to bring his ID. He only had his phone with him. "I think I forgot to bring my ID." Marcel Zongo met with Traoré in secret once more. "No Africans allowed in this area. Do I need to speak in a more understandable language?" said Mercier with a mocking expression. "Since you have no ID, you cannot enter the building for security reasons." But today was different. Ahmed stepped forward angrily, but Traoré stopped him. He wanted to stay calm. "Why do you only check Africans for ID? Did you ask for ID from the Europeans who just went in?" 10 minutes later, when 6 armored vehicles and fully equipped soldiers stood in front of the building, the expression on Officer Mercier's face was priceless. Mercier's face reddened. "This is my job, and I decide how to do it. Now please move away, or I'll have to call security." The streets of Ouagadougou were just waking up. Traoré thought for a moment. This was a situation many Burkinabe faced every day. They were humiliated by foreign powers in their own country. He took out his phone and dialed a single number. "I want to see how my people live, how they feel." The Africa-Europe Economic Summit in Geneva was being held in the largest hall of the historic United Nations building. As soon as he hung up, the radios of the French officers guarding the center began buzzing frantically. A French official ran out from inside and whispered something in Mercier's ear. Mercier's face suddenly paled. Among the messages coming from the radios, a single sentence had shocked him: "The president is in front of the building." Traoré had cut him off with a smile. Not even 10 minutes passed before 6 armored vehicles and fully equipped soldiers stood in front of the building. The expression on Officer Mercier's face was priceless. His mouth hung open, his eyes widened with fear. "What do you want?" There was a deep thought behind this decision. Mercier was stunned. He was just realizing that he had insulted the president of Burkina Faso. His knees began to tremble. I didn't know," he stammered. Traoré looked at him, with not anger but deep determination in his eyes. "The problem isn't that you didn't know who I am, Mr. Mercier. The problem is that you don't know how to respect the person in front of you." "Bread prices have risen too much," said an old woman selling Traoré a basket of mangoes. Laurent Dubois, the director of the French Cultural Center, rushed outside. His face had turned white with fear. "Mr. President, I apologize. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Please come inside, we would be honored to host you." Toward noon, while walking in the city center, a building caught his attention. Traoré shook his head. "No, thank you. Today I wanted to come here not as a president, but as a citizen. If I'm not allowed in as a citizen, I won't enter as a president either. Shall we go in?" Dubois nervously tried to explain. "Security measures? You know, recent threats. French intelligence might be active here." "As I understand it," said Traoré, "only people with a certain skin color are seen as threats." "I'm curious," said Traoré. These words were heard by the crowd that had gathered around. People began to whisper and take photos with their cell phones. The incident was rapidly spreading on social media. Traoré turned to his soldiers. "Colonel Zongo, I want a detailed report on the activities of this cultural center. Our foreign ministry should also look into this matter. If foreign institutions in Burkina Faso don't show respect to our citizens, it may be time to reconsider their presence," said Mercier, raising his hand. The concern on Dubois's face deepened. "Mr. President, please don't make a hasty decision. This was just an exception. But today was different." "Exceptions," said Traoré, "usually reveal the truth, Mr. Dubois. And today I saw a truth. Why do you only check Africans for ID?" The crowd had now grown. Phones were raised in the air, people were chanting Traoré. "Traoré." The president turned to them and raised his hand. "Today, like many of you, I was humiliated by having my identity questioned. This is something many of you have experienced for years. But this era is now ending. In Burkina Faso, no one can treat our citizens as second-class humans. They were humiliated by foreign powers in their own country." The crowd began to applaud. Mercier had shrunk into a corner, trying to understand how events had reached this point. Traoré nodded to his guard Ahmed and began walking through the crowd. People made way for him, some wanting to shake his hand, others just wanting to touch him. News of the incident spread quickly. That evening, the French ambassador was urgently summoned to the Burkina Faso Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The ambassador was forced to issue a formal apology for the entire incident. But for Traoré, this wasn't enough. The next day, the Burkina Faso government announced a new decision: all foreign cultural centers and institutions in the country would be inspected, and those not treating Burkina Faso citizens equally and respectfully would have their activities suspended. The French Cultural Center was closed for 2 weeks. Jean Mercier was expelled from the country. The shock of the incident reverberated through French diplomatic circles. While meeting with Colonel Zongo in his office at the palace, Traoré was examining reports on his desk. "What did this incident teach us, Colonel?" He was just realizing that he had insulted the president of Burkina Faso. His knees began to tremble. Zongo thoughtfully replied, "We better understood the difficulties our people face every day, Mr. President." "I didn't know." Traoré nodded. "Yes, and more importantly, we understood how some foreign powers still see us. For them, we are still their colonies. But we are no longer, and we need to show them that." "Bread prices have risen too much," said an old woman selling Traoré a basket of mangoes. This incident became a turning point in Burkina Faso's struggle for independence. Under Traoré's leadership, the country began to take a stronger stance against foreign influences. A week later, Traoré addressed his people: "A country's true independence is achieved not just on paper, but when it protects the dignity of every citizen. I am here to protect your dignity. Please come inside, we would be honored to host you." The Jean Mercier incident went viral on social media. The hashtag Traoré trended across Africa. Young Africans appreciated Traoré's stance and expressed the need for leaders like him. The French government tried to prevent the incident from affecting economic relations. But Traoré was determined. Economic relations are important, but the dignity of our people is not for sale. Shall we go in? After this incident, Traoré began to mingle with the people in civilian clothes more frequently. Each time, he listened to the people's problems, took notes, and devised solutions. This made him one of Africa's most beloved leaders. Mercier, upon returning to France, found himself at the center of a diplomatic scandal. The French media called it the Mercier scandal. Some French politicians argued that relations with African countries needed to be reassessed. Africa is changing, said a French analyst on television. We can no longer approach it with old colonial attitudes. Leaders like Ibrahim Traoré are the pioneers of this change. Traoré turned to his soldiers. A month later, the French Cultural Center reopened, but with significant changes. The center was now required to also promote Burkina Faso culture. Mixed exhibitions were organized, and local artists were given space. Laurent Dubois was removed from his position, and a manager respectful of cultural diversity was appointed in his place. For Traoré, this incident was not an end, but a beginning. An important step in Burkina Faso's struggle for true independence. In his office at the palace, he was lost in thought as he looked at the map of Africa. One day, he said to himself, all of Africa will determine its own destiny. And on that day, no one will be able to tell an African, you don't belong here, on their own land. Shouted French President Pierre Laurent, calling his advisors to an emergency meeting. Ahmed became one of Traoré's most trusted guards after that day. Remembering that day, he said with a laugh, Mr. President, I will never forget the expression on that French officer's face. A process would also be initiated to review the activities of Western companies in other African countries. Traoré smiled. I won't forget either, Ahmed. But what stays in my mind is not his surprise. It's the pride on the faces of our people. That's what matters to me. The documents I showed you were just the tip of the iceberg, he said. This incident turned into a story told not only in Burkina Faso but throughout Africa. How a young leader took off his military uniform, mingled with the people, and by refusing to be humiliated in his own country, inspired an entire continent. Sometimes, Traoré said later in an interview, real power lies not in the uniform, but in the courage to protect your dignity. And we Africans are now determined to protect our dignity. But we need to be careful. Jean Mercier lost his job after returning to France. But he learned a lesson from this incident. While working at a private security company, he began giving cultural sensitivity training to all employees. If you judge a person by their appearance, you might one day realize that the person in front of you is a head of state, he would tell new employees. Ibrahim Traoré, meanwhile, became an important symbol of Africa's independence struggle after this incident. A leader who lived among the people, knew their problems, and protected their honor. His pictures were painted on walls in the streets of Burkina Faso, his name was mentioned in songs. As a leader giving hope for Africa's future, Traoré's story grew even stronger with the day he walked without his military uniform. This seemingly small incident became a symbol of a continent's struggle for dignity.